Okay, so I've missed a few days, so I've failed my 30-day challenge, obviously. Um, well, I have to keep going, so I may as well just pretend those days didn't exist. And let's carry on. 5 minutes starting. Okay, so black to move. Oh, I didn't flip the board. Oh well. Black has king, queen, rook, two bishops, four pawns. White has king, queen, two rooks, a knight, and three pawns. So the imbalance is two bishops and a pawn for black, for a rook and a knight for white. Okay, so checks. Black has queen takes g2, bishop takes g2, check. White has no checks. Captures. Black has, apart from the checks we've already mentioned, black has bishop takes h2, bishop takes b2. White has queen takes e5, rook takes f7, rook takes d5, knight takes c8. Threats. Now, I've looked at one of Dan Heisman, or however you say his name, one of his videos. Let's see. Threats. So, apart from the checks and captures, black's threats could be queen h6, threatening queen takes h2 mate, queen h5, which is a bad threat because a questionable threat because it can be taken. Queen h4, all of those are the same idea. Queen f4, queen g3, again, same idea, but those two are bad threats. Rook c2 is a threat. Well, first let's go through the queen threats again. Anything that threatens the queen, so queen g4 and queen h5. Queen e3, queen d2, all count as threats with the queen, even though they don't do much. Queen d8 threatens the rook. I think that's all the threats we can make with the queen, right? So, going through them. Queen h6, queen h5 bad, queen h4, queen g3 bad, queen f4 bad, queen e3 bad, queen g4 bad, queen d2 bad, queen d8, which may or may not be bad. With the rook, we have rook 8. Rook a8, maybe. Rook c7. Maybe. Rook c5, bad. Wait. Yeah, it's a bad threat, but rook c5 bad, rook c2 bad. Rook c1, which is interesting. With the light square bishop, we have bishop f4. Sorry, bishop f3, bishop c4, bishop f3 bad, bishop c4 interesting. And my time's up. But yeah, I definitely need to work on threat perception just because yeah, I think that's a really interesting. It feels like a waste of time because it feels like over engineering and I should just keep things simple. But at the same time, I think a bit of work on it might be helpful. It's hard to say. Anyway, I'll review, I'll come back, and we'll do the 10-minute section. So, on reviewing, there were a few errors in my previous looking at threats. But yeah, I think I'll try and incorporate that just to improve my awareness and ability to perceive them. Pardon me, because clearly I'm struggling. So for our 10-minute section, we have black to move. Black has king, queen, rook, 2 bishops, 4 pawns. White has king, queen, 2 rooks, knight, and 3 pawns. So the imbalance is black has 2 bishops and a pawn for white's rook and knight. Okay, so on to checks. We'll start with black. Since black is to move, black has queen takes g2, bishop takes g2, check. White has no checks. Captures, apart from the checks previously mentioned, black has bishop takes h2 and bishop takes b2. Perhaps we should immediately go over. No, let's wait that. So white has rook takes f7, queen takes e5, rook takes d5, knight takes c8. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4 captures. Let's start from the top, just briefly, because I want to, include the number. So, checks. Black has queen takes g2, bishop takes g2, so that's 2 checks. White has no captures, so that's 0 captures. Sorry, white has no checks. Black has, apart from the checks, black has bishop takes h2 and bishop takes b2, so that's 2 captures. White has queen takes c5, rook takes d5, rook takes f7, and knight takes c8. So what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4 captures. Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4 captures. Threats. Black has threats on h2. So there's 5. So you can go to queen h6, queen h5, queen h4, queen f4, queen g3 for threats on h2. Black can make threats on the hanging rook, so queen d8, bishop c7, rook c5. Black can make threats on the queen, so queen g4, the previously mentioned queen h5, queen e3, queen d2, rook c2, bishop c4, bishop f3. And I think that's it. So what do we have? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 threats with the queen. Oh no, 9 threats with the queen because we've got 1, 2, 3 on the H file, 4, 5 on the G file, 6 on the F file, 7 on E3, 8 and 9 on D2 and D8, right? So the dark square bishop has no threats. The rook has... Oh no, the dark square bishop has 1 threat on C7, so that's 10. The rook has 1, 2 on C5 and C2. The light square, so that makes 12. The light square bishop has 2 on C4 and F3, so that makes 14. And then I have to figure out how many of them are actually plausible threats, right? So white has what can we consider a threat, huh? Well, the rook on c8 is undefended. So the queen could play... the queen on g5 is undefended. Okay, let's start with that. So h4... Such a stupid threat. h4... queen d2, queen e3, queen takes e5. Okay, that's a capture. We're not going to mention that again. So queen d2, queen e3, queen g4, queen h5. Queen has queen c2, queen a6. So what's that? 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 threats with the queen. Rook f5, which again is completely stupid as a threat, but in fact, this feels like rather nonsense, doesn't it? Still, we'll do it and we'll review. Rook c1. Yeah, the rook f5 doesn't count as a threat because there's nothing... Right, because even if you take the queen or the bishop, rook c1 is a complete counter to it. So rook c5. Rook a4. Oh, yeah, we can threaten to take the pawn on b4, right? So any move that threatens to take the pawn on b4 but it's not a good result, right? This is kind of confusing. Right, the pawn is not important here at all. Let's just return to sensible things, right? Right, rook c5 is technically a threat. But, okay. Candidate moves for black. No point attacking the queen unless bishop c4, which kind of does make some sense. But that's a complex line. So candidate moves, bishop c4, queen h4, queen h6. I almost consider rook c1, but I don't think so. Mind rook c1 does create pressure, and that is quite valuable. So rook c1 is also a candidate. And the time's up, so let's go and review this, and I'll be back in a second. So with the review, yeah, I think it'll be good to keep working on just going through all the possible threats, but I don't think it's a good path towards efficiency. So my idea now is to look at target-based threats, and hopefully that will help me to identify threats clearly and quickly, without systematically overlooking anything important. So we'll see how that goes. Anything else to look at? I did make a few mistakes. But yeah, on to the next section. So starting the 20 minutes. So black to move. Black has queen a rook, 2 bishops, 4 pawns. White has queen, 2 rooks, a knight, and 3 pawns. So black has 2 bishops and a pawn for a rook and a knight. Nominally about equal strength-wise, but it depends on placement. Right, so black has... Okay, let's look at sort of target-based stuff, right? Black's king is obviously in a bit of a vulnerable position, with the 2 bishops and the queen looking at it, and the rook is potentially also well placed. But black also has the rook and the light squared bishop hanging. And the light squared bishop, and also the dark squared bishop is, well, by the definition of being undefended, by, well, not undefended, but it's equal numbers, attacked an equal number of times as it is defended. Clearly, the dark square bishop is also hanging, so the light square bishop can't simply move without a clear benefit. So, black has two checks focused on g2, but g2 is defended twice, so it's not clear that any capture will pay off, that any check will pay off. We can look at possible deflections or pins, but none of that looks that great. Okay. Captures. So black has capture on b2, capture on h2, as well as the check. b2 is defended, so it makes absolutely no sense. h2 is an interesting one. But you know, it captures, but what further does it do, right? It's not entirely clear to me what black gains. Clearly he loses the exchange in the bishop for a pawn. So threats. Right, well, black's rook and his light square bishop are hanging. So the threat would need to be sufficiently, it would need to be greater than the value of a rook. So attacks on the queen, bishop c4, bishop f3, attack threats on the king, so anything on the h file, anything that attacks h2, so queen h6, queen h5, queen h4. There is a problem with that, since the e5 bishop is left hanging, or we exchange queens. Rook c1, which just adds tension and saves the rook. It doesn't save the light square bishop though. Other threats would include well, the g2 square is an instant mate. The h2 square is a threat of mate. So if the white queen can be deflected, that from the second rank, that would allow black to mate. Okay, so white has no checks. White has captures on c8, d5, e5, f7. Two of those pieces are just completely hanging. The bishop on e5 is kind of hanging, f7 is not. So threats would include the capture on d5, pinning the dark square bishop to the queen. I don't actually see any other threats that white can make that make sense. So so black candidates for black. Rook c1, bishop takes h2, it would be lovely to make a threat with the bishop, but I can't see how it works. It would be nice to pin the knight, but again, it's not clear how that works. So rook c1. Rook c1, let's say if rook takes d5, it's the most logical attempt for white. What does black have left? Black doesn't have a lot of options, right? So rook c1's out. Bishop c4. It's a nice threat, but it just queen takes e5. Ends up with queen takes e5, rook takes e5, bishop takes f1. And black has regained an exchange, but whether that's enough, it feels like black ought to be able to make more of it. What else? Bishop takes h2. So let's say knight takes c8, for argument's sake. That would be a mistake since bishop g3 leaves white unable to address the mate threat, I think. Right, even if you play something like knight e7 check, there aren't any. Rook takes f7. It becomes kind of complex, huh? But I do maintain that should be winning for black. Which I haven't explained that clearly. I just think if white has to sacrifice a piece, I think black should be able to bury his king sufficiently. But what other options are we left with, huh? Bishop c7. It's actually an effective threat for black. Since, I don't know, maybe not. Since the rook hangs. Queen h5 just leads to an exchange of queens. There's rook d8 as a prophylactic move, preparing what? Preparing to move the dark square bishop so he can attack h2. It's slow. It's very, very slow. Okay, so our candidates were bishop takes h2, rook c1, bishop c4, I guess, but that's not. It's forcing, but it's not strong. Apologies if you can hear the Hoover in the background. Rook c2 would be nice. Oh, wait. Rook c2. Queen takes c2. Queen h5. And the g-pawn can't move. So h3 has to be played. So instead of queen h5, so rook c2, queen takes c2 seems kind of forced. Queen h4, because now black no longer needs to defend the e5 bishop. White has a check on c8. That doesn't... Oh, it does accomplish something. Right, queen h4, queen c8 check, king g7, queen h3 can be played. What a ball. And so what if black plays b3, preparing rook c2? b3, rook takes d5. Rook c2. Rook takes e5. That's a problem. But right, the target is the G second rank, the G pawn and the H pawn. So that would make a lot of sense. But it's too slow. So what if bishop takes h2? Say king takes h2. Because if bishop takes h2, knight takes c8. Then bishop g3 threatens mate in 2. It seems to be the best idea really so far. Bishop takes h2. Bishop takes h2, king takes h2 is a critical line of this. b3 is my idea. But it's not clear whether that will work. I ought to calculate it, but I don't know. It's still struggling with organizing my ideas really in a way that makes them very natural to work through. Still, we'll come back to this another time. Perhaps I'll give it a review. Give it a review. But yeah, that's might be it for today.